for the third clue in our first treasure hunt puzzle. So the third clue, depending on whether or not you get the references, will either be pretty easy or feel absolutely impossible. So I'm here to try and explain a little bit about how you're supposed to go about solving it. So if we start with the clue itself, there are kind of 3 or 4 main sections really. The first section says, "Elementary, dear treasure hunter, you have reached the third clue." Pretty standard and similar to some of the sentences that you've seen in other clues previously. The second section says, "As a great director has shown, serial is the key, period," which just sounds like a load of nonsense on the face of it. Then we've got some numbers, all kind of whole numbers separated by slashes, and then it asks us to find the cereal. So as far as we're aware, we're looking for some kind of breakfast cereal. Now, the starting point when you're looking at any type of clue, and this applies to treasure hunt, it applies to cryptic crosswords or other kind of logical thinking puzzles, a giveaway is always if there's an unusual word or a word that looks like it's not quite in the right place. And I think there are 2 of those words when you look at this clue. So in the first section, you've got this elementary, dear treasure hunter, which is actually a Sherlock Holmes reference for people who are fans of Sherlock Holmes. But even so, elementary is a strange word. It kind of feels like that sentence has been put together just to try and get that specific word into the clue somehow. So elementary is already starting to kind of tweak my attention when I look at this for the first time. The second thing that's unusual is the word period and the way it's in its own sentence. So whenever a word is put into its own sentence, that in itself is unusual. And I think the way this is written kind of chimes, it doesn't really chime with the way that most of the other clues have been written. It's kind of, it feels like an Americanism, but it's just a bit of an, it's in an odd place, okay? So there are those 2 words straight away that jump out of me as being unusual. Now, this is where I was going to talk about the references. So if you have some kind of basic knowledge of science, then I think this will hopefully already be starting to ring a few bells, because element and period are both kind of references to the periodic table. So if you were to go into Google and type in element and period, the first thing that you're going to get is a link to the periodic table. And what the periodic table does is it shows all of the different elements and it assigns them all a number. So whenever you're looking at a clue and you've got numbers that you think might need to be translated into letters, or vice versa, you're always looking for something to use to translate those numbers. So the first thing that should jump out of you here, if you're aware of the periodic table and what it is, this hint of the periodic table, instantly you're thinking, okay, I've got a load of letters and numbers, I can use them to translate. So if we go back to the clue, we've got 5 different numbers here. So what we need to do is go into our periodic table and figure out where the numbers are and find the letters that match. So I found a website that very handily lists them all in numerical order, just to make it a little bit easier. So for example, the first number is 91, which would be PA. And if you go through and do that for the 5 letters, you get this, sorry, the 5 numbers, you get this Scrabble of letters. It doesn't make a huge amount of sense at the moment. PAZRVIAL. So what do we do on Treasure Hunt when we don't know the answer? We type them into Google. And depending on the exact way that you type this in, this is what you'll get. So it actually suggests a word for you. So it almost solves, if it's an anagram, it almost solves the anagram. So the first thing that comes up for Parzival is a medieval romance. Well, you never know. Treasure Hunt does have some references to quite esoteric books, but in this case, that's not exactly what it is. You look down, there's some kind of weird pictures and various other things, but there's nothing that jumps out. So then we need to go back to our clue. So we go back to our clue, we've unscrambled our numbers, and that's given us a word, but we need to get a bit more context for the word. So there's some bits of the clue we've not looked at yet. So there are 2 bits really. As a great director has shown, and serial is the key. So straight away, is there anything that we might want to think about from a director's perspective? There are 2 ways you can actually solve this clue. So the first one, we've got our word, we would then be to think of a great director. So the one that came to mind when I was reading this was, for example, Steven Spielberg. And if you type in Parzival Steven Spielberg, all of a sudden you're getting links to this movie, Ready Player One. If you go in and look about what Ready Player One is all about, it's actually about a treasure hunt. So instantly that becomes interesting from that perspective. And that can eventually, if you start digging around into the plot, particularly the plot of the book that underlies Ready Player One, and start searching for serial, you'll find there's a big reference to the serial that we're after. The way that I would have gone about this was, rather than faff around with the great director, was just go straight for serial, because it feels to me um, like a more unusual word. So if you were to just type in Parzival serial into Google, you'll instantly get a link to a Ready Player One website and a number of Ready Player One websites. And what you'll see is this: Captain Crunch, or a reference to Captain Crunch. And you'd find that in different links. So one of the clues that unlocks a gate in Ready Player One is Captain Crunch cereal, which is one of the reasons I decided to include it in Treasure Hunt, because it's kind of a similar type of thing that we're doing. So if you were to go into one of these links, have a look or search for cereal, do a Control F or whatever, that's what you'd find. And it's really as easy as that. So we go back to our clue page, we type in Captain Crunch, hit enter, and we've solved the next clue. Hopefully that wasn't too difficult. I know it kind of had a reliance on understanding the periodic table, or knowing what the periodic table was, but I think most people seem to get that one relatively quickly, particularly after I dropped a few hints on Facebook.